Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. As Fiona mentioned, SIE is practicing what it preaches in terms of here is a prototype of some new material that we hope fits into our existing future-ready methodology. We are going to record my audio over the slides, obviously not any breakout sessions. The slides have been done as a handout that you can come back to, and these will be made available to you. So the title of this workshop is called Imagining the Future of Learning, Exploring and Validating Your Idea. And obviously this title relates to the summer challenge that we've set the students around the future of learning, and it'd be great to see some of you enter this. However, although we're going to look at the future of learning and what that might look like, even without COVID-19, you're going to practice some tools and techniques that will not only help you enter the challenge, if that's what you want to do, but I think they are tools and techniques that you can take and look at any sector, not just the future of learning. So that's the idea behind this workshop, is that we're going to give you some tools and techniques to help you think about entering the competition, but also develop some new skills around engaging with the pace of change, new methods of strategy development, and skills and techniques that you can apply to creating a new venture of your own, or you can actually showcase these skills to future employers. So although we've taken the title around the challenge, we're going to look at tools and techniques and use the challenge title as our case study. Everything you come across in this workshop, you can apply to any sector that you're interested in, whether that is for new venture creation or whether that is for boosting your CV. Right, okay. Why does SIE want you to imagine the future of learning? And this applies to anything. If I were to say, why do we need to imagine the future full stop? Pre-COVID-19, Hermione, and I think I saw Monica join as well. You'll be familiar with this slide. This was pre-COVID-19. This is very much a slide that SI used to demonstrate the pace of change and why you really couldn't sit back and just say, let's see what happens. We really had to start thinking and imagining what a particular sector might look like into 2 to 5 years' time. Then along came COVID-19, and I've been sort of reading up on some of the articles that are coming out about the impact of COVID-19. And I like the fact that a lot of these articles talk about the great pause. Yes, we've been running around like mad things, changing business models, changing partnerships, changing supply chains, using new platforms like Teams and Zoom. But I think we've also been able to sort of stand back and say, well, what insights can we take from this? What bits of this change do we want to keep and adapt? So I like this idea of the great pause, that actually now is such a good time to imagine the future. And I think it's even more important. I was looking around to say, well, what will happen around COVID-19? The next phase of the response won't be a slowdown, but an acceleration of change innovation, with many of these innovations already in the background before the pandemic. So we're thinking of change around telehealth, business models, supply chains, and learning. So as we go through this, and actually if you're sort of using any of the tools and techniques, keep in mind, we hear a lot of this phrase called new normal. This does not have to be the future. What we have at the moment does not have to be the future. It's a time to think about possible futures, not just the new normal. And this is the key thing. These possible futures are preferred. They're not just plausible, and they involve factors beyond COVID-19. So just a recap on the Festival Innovation Challenge: create a short 2 to 3 minute video of your vision, illustrate a day in the life, trigger some emotional responses. In effect, your video of your vision is going to be a prototype. So effectively, this is more than just a competition. It's an opportunity for you to be heard and influence different stakeholders. Very emotive words. Your video has to be a vision, it has to illustrate, it has to generate some emotional responses, and it has to influence. Those of me who know me well, and my colleague Jonathan's just back from his holiday, he'll be groaning at this. But the real power of imagining the future, whether that's meeting the challenge or whether it's placing any ideas for you have for a new business, in a possible future. I think this is a really powerful quote. Stories of the future have the power to liberate us from the tyranny of what was and what is. So if we can actually present a vision of the future, which is what effectively businesses do when they put a vision on their website, then it can be really very liberating, and it can actually start thinking about not just what was, what is, but what could be. And I thought a really good example of the power of imagining the future comes from a project called Vision Not Victim, which was carried out by a photographer called Meredith Hutchison. And this was the idea of taking female refugees in Syria and Jordan and getting them to imagine their future and, in fact, wear their future. And you'll see here there's some text beside the picture, and it's given as a future. It's not "I want to be a pilot." It is "I am a pilot, and this is how I got there." So this is somebody working to imagine a future for these female children by taking them out of the reality of the moment. Now, of course, there's barriers to any of this happening, but these visions are actually aimed at not just the children themselves, but also the stakeholders who might have the power to break down some of those barriers. If you're imagining a future, you're helping these children design their future. Again, you can see that in very much as "I am here, I am kind and loving, therefore I am an excellent doctor," not that I want to be an excellent doctor. Again, imagining the future allows people to experience it. Here again is a young female student in her classroom imagining that it's an early morning start and she's waiting for her students to arrive. She's about to teach them how to read and write Arabic. If you're interested in this project, there's a link in the slides to it. But I thought that project was a really good example of the power of imagining the future. If you can imagine the future, you can experience it, you can get other people to experience it, then you can start to take steps to action that future in the present through new ideas. So back to the challenge. Okay, why did we set this challenge? Why do we think it's important to imagine the future of learning? Why do we think it's important to imagine the future, full stop? We all imagine the future, but just the majority of us are not very good at it. We have a neurological bias to prior and present experiences and knowledge. And we're also very good at just saying this is fine. I think particularly in the current climate, I'm fine with Zoom, I'm fine with Microsoft Teams, but that's not particularly a good future around learning. And that's the challenge we have. The reality of the moment is so palpable and powerful that it can hold our imagination in a tight orbit from which it never escapes. So how do we escape the reality of the moment around learning, around any topic? Effectively, what we're asking you to do is design a future that uses different information and knowledge and allows people in the present to experience it. So how can you be a designer of the future that allows you to present a vision that influences others and they want to say, I want to act on that future now in the present to make it happen? So there's three parts to this that SI has pulled out. We think it's important to understand change, what is driving, influencing, creating new patterns of innovation. We also think it's really important to connect your vision for the future to the present and the weight of history. You can't break the universe. So, for example, I could present a vision of the future where all teachers are cyborgs. Yeah, you know, they're all robots, they're all zombies. That is breaking the universe. Present that, and people are going to say, oh, that's not rooted in reality. I can't engage with that. And I'll come back to this idea of weight of history and don't break the universe in a moment. But also know yourself. What are your biases, experiences, and assumptions that could prevent you from imagining the great possibilities? Right, so the first step in this is, how do we understand how change happens? This, ladies and gentlemen, is very important for meeting the challenge, for imagining any future, but I also think for any of you who are thinking about setting up your own new venture, I think this is also an important stage as well, to know that actually you are following what we call the direction of travel. So we've got a bit of a quiz here for you. 4 points. Which one of the following is the most important change factor? The vision we have for the future. In other words, what brings about change? The vision we have for the future, the innovations that are happening in the present, the weight of the past, or do we have to consider the previous three factors? So just a quick poll, just interested to get your views on this. And I should say there's no right or wrong answer. Okay, we'll move on quite quickly from that, okay? I think what we're seeing is a sort of coming out in favour of all three have to be considered, and spot on, you're right, okay? All of these three have to be considered. The important thing that we have to look out is which one of those three change factors, vision for the future, innovations in the present, the weight of the past, actually have a particular influence at a particular point in time. They're all relevant, but which one is going to have the most weight? It's going to sort of change the landscape, if you like. Right, so what I want to do is break down those three important change factors into a worksheet that you can think about. It's based on some thinking around quite a sort of famous futurist, whose name I will not be able to pronounce. It's somebody called Sohail Ayatollah. I will share details of that, but it's based on some of his thinking around how do you unpack the dynamic forces that are shaping a particular sector. So we've put our topic in there, the future of learning, and we've put in the push of the present, pull of the future, and weight of history. Now, again, if you're looking at exploring another topic for a new venture of your own, for example, travel, you could put in the future of travel. Yeah, but again, for the purposes of the competition, we're looking at the future of learning, and we've got the three dynamic forces of change represented there in the boxes. So let's give you some definitions. Pull of the future: values, visions, images that can attract or pull us towards a possible future. They can be positive or negative, but they have a persuasive pull on our perceptions of what the future could be. So, for example, the UN sustainability goals, they're a positive pull. These are visions. They state out what do we want to be the situation in the world around zero hunger, around poverty, around quality education, gender equality, decent work and economic growth. So each one of those goals is a pull of the future because they contain a vision and a set of values. It can be other people's visions of the future. For example, Meredith Hutchison's vision of the future for the refugees that she was working with. Push of the present. It can be useful to think about a pestle or steeple analysis here: political, economic, social, technology, legal, or environmentally. These are the big forces. We're thinking trends, policies, technologies, social demographics that have the potential to drive change in a certain direction. They may not be inevitable, but there's data to back up any possible impact these pushes of the present might have. So, for example, there's lots of reports out there about a growing population and what that means for the future of learning. Here's some examples. Now, if you go on to the SI resources around meeting this challenge, again, I think this is important for anybody thinking up their own business. Are you in line with the pushes of the present? You'll find all examples of these on the resource page for the challenge. Some of you will be familiar with this sort of concept of driver or big forces that have a potential to have what we call a trajectory or impact. So there I've put in COVID-19. It's the elephant in the room. We cannot ignore it. But I think with people not being able to travel, the impact of that might be we have more regional face-to-face delivery. We'll have more localized learning. We'll have demand for high-quality online learning with meaningful human-to-human contact, what's called high touch. So very interactive screens. I think we'll see the rise, we already have, but more tech giants like Apple, Google, Microsoft involved in learning as we use their platforms. But interestingly enough, I think we'll see the rise of small and agile edutech startup companies as well. We'll talk about one of these later. Companies that are startups that have the agility to go in and change the landscape. Inequalities, but I think we'll see demand for new skills to help manage the pandemic and future management techniques. For example, there'll be demand for more people with data collection skills, data modelling skills, and possibly a focus on national recovery, with learning institutions playing a key role in their region's recovery. I won't talk too much to this, but again, a big force, artificial technology, one of the big technology pushes or drivers. We might see more robotic mentors. We might see AI designing and leading on a person's learning, but actually people might not trust this AI. We might see robotic mentors attending class for learners, new learning-based apps that deliver bite-sized learning, inequalities and access to mobile technology-based learning, because not everybody might have the technology to allow them to do this. So again, you can have drivers and impacts that actually sort of contradict each other. As well as having these big forces, we've also got existing present-day innovations that are also a push for change that can create new trends. There's small innovations or actions out there in the margins that have the potential to disrupt the status quo. They're evidence of futures in the making. And at first glance, they may seem ridiculous, but they get us thinking, what if? And they also might dictate the pace of change. If you look at a signal, you might think, oh, that's really going to scale up. Now, to give you an example of a signal, here is Greta striking outside her school for climate change. And you might think that climate action or climate issues is a signal. It isn't. It's one of the big forces. It's a driver. A signal is somebody's response to that. So here we've got Greta being quite innovative, sitting outside her school striking, and then we've got a picture of her in the square at Helsinki where basically her one person movement, if you like, has scaled up to tens of thousands. So that's what a signal is. It's a small, tangible event, innovation that is in response to those drivers and impacts. Okay, so here's a signal, and you'll find this in the pack. So basically, signals, you can find them rooted in the drivers and impacts. Now, Google search can throw these up. For example, the role of artificial intelligence in the classroom. It just so happens that we know Marty the Robot as an SI entrepreneur, but this is a robot that students build, and they are able to learn about coding in the workplace, in the classroom. This is Learn. It's an app. So rather than going to a classroom to learn about coding, this is an app that people can use to learn how to code in bite-sized chunks. Kaitabu is a book in Swahili. And again, if you go in and look at some of the drivers and impacts that we have in the resources, you'll see that I've put down things like with a growing population, the impact for that is how do we give people more access to the materials they need. This is a push in the present or a signal that allows people and parents to rent a couple of pages of a textbook, to rent a chapter rather than buy the whole textbook, which could be quite expensive, and they pay using the equivalent of PayPal. So these are quite key pushes of the present, signals, small innovations that are rooted in some of the big drivers and impacts out there. Weight of history. This is often where we can find our real biases. So for example, I have a deep connection to actually going to a physical place for learning. I like to go to somewhere where there's a weight of history. I also love new stationery. But weight of history can be things like structural barriers, big infrastructure. In learning, we've got these big university campuses. It can be culture, deep historical connections, government regulations, law of physics, or anything that limits the speed or reach of change. They're anchors, or something that keeps us anchored, if you like. And that's quite important. Law of physics, we can't change that. I was trying to do a live course 2 weeks ago, and science, if you like, for want of a better word, was preventing some of us coming together at our best. We had people on the west coast of America at 9 a.m. We had people on the east coast of America at 12. You had me joining at 5 p.m. for a full working day, and the poor people in Asia were joining at 1 a.m. the following day. You know, it's tend to be things that are quite hard to change. There's an example, you know, an expensive, rekitted out, massive lecture theatre. So here's me jotted down my thinking about putting stuff into the push of the present, the pull of the future, weight of history, given the examples that I've given you. Now you'll notice here I've put growing awareness of the United Nations Sustainability Goals, but you'll also see the goals appear in the pull of the future. So that's deliberate. I think we've got a growing awareness of the goals, and we have to educate people around them. but we're not quite yet there. The pool of the future still has that vision of what education should look like. And you'll see I've put down in weight of history, expensive campuses, existing university business models, and historical and cultural connections that we have. So we're going to give you just a very short breakout exercise of no more than 5 minutes. We'd like you to maybe see if you can add to what we've put into that slide. Please see if you can add any other examples of your own. So maybe you want to consider another big push that's not just COVID-19 or artificial intelligence. You might think of some other big forces or trends out there for the push of the future. You might have come across some small signals or innovations of your own. For the future, you might have some examples of other people's visions for the future, and you might have some other thinking about what is the weight of history around learning. Okay. So feedback, group facilitators, any thoughts on what went into push, pull, weight of history?
Well, sorry, I'll jump in first if that's okay. We had a bit of a chat about, again, COVID-19 and things that we hadn't really, that weren't sort of immediately obvious when we're thinking about COVID-19 as well, like the impact to the global economy sort of beyond the kind of biotechnology side of things. It's all about the kind of wider impact of it. And one of the points that came up as well about technology was with blended learning models. It's again thinking about how applicable that would be to all the different variations of courses that are there. Like, for example, engineering and arts courses. It's not going to be as easy to do a kind of virtual learning environment as it would be for something like English.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Scott. Thanks for raising it. I think this idea of we have to think beyond COVID-19 and the new normal, where we're making best of a situation, if you like. So even if you take away anything from this, think about, how can we, innovate for future courses? Think beyond just our immediate response and what comes out of that. Anything else, Scott?
So from my group, I think we thought blended learning came up as well, and really in one of the challenges is with the weight of history is actually the reluctance for people to move into new models of learning even now, although so the need for human interaction is very strong, but that what's happening in the present is very much starting to drive change, which was interesting. And the other thing, we were just looking at the kind of future, was thinking about things like government change. Things are happening or government strategy is your example. Things are happening so quickly that there's a risk that the quality of what goes on is impacted as well. So it's about making sure that you know what you're doing in the future.
I think, guys, just to reiterate on that point, that's why I think it's so important to present people with a vision of the future. If you don't do it, then you run the risk of make do, lack of quality. But this idea of imagining the future of learning now in the great pause is so important, because then you can start to ideally factor in things like quality. So that's the interesting thing. This is work in progress, ladies and gentlemen. That exercise, if we were sort of pre-COVID, we would be looking at doing that, over a much longer period of time. And we're actually looking to respond to COVID-19 with blended learning and looking at how we can actually expand what we're doing to make it what we call a high-touch quality learning intervention. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're actually part of our first prototype, just testing possible content, not necessarily the delivery. So really what I wanted to get across was that, yes, we've got that very equal triangle in the previous slide. Yeah, all sides are equal, but they're dynamic, they move. Yeah. And we've got the push of the present, which has really started to pull that weight of history up towards the push of the present, if you like. It's pushing that equal triangle where each dimension has similar weight. It's actually starting that push of the present is pulling that weight of history and sort of freeing us a little bit from some of the constraints around business models and infrastructure. Pool of the future, again, if we're looking to implement quality education for all, it might start to exert a bit of an influence and actually start pushing or pulling on the push of the present to say we've got to do more innovation in the present now to meet the vision we have for the future. So I quite like to liken this to cat's cradle. Okay, there's more strands in this first picture, but if you think about it as that triangle being strings, how do they all move between each other? Yes, all three bits are really important, but one might be the more dominant. It might exert the most influence, in which case it's moving us away from that perfect triangle shape into a new shape of the future. So coming back to this, here they are all equal, but how they might move, for example, AI Marty the Robot. That is artificial intelligence in the classroom. And it's starting to move away from the weight of history where we had traditional teaching about coding and science. So it's still not what I call breaking the universe. If I was a teacher and I was looking at that, I'd be thinking, yes, I still have a traditional classroom. It's just my methods of delivery have to be different. So it's not breaking the universe, but it's pushing the weight of history out of it. That's equal, if you like, it's equal dominance. It's AI starting to have a bit more dominance and actually freeing us from some of the thinking around the weight of history, some of those anchors around the weight of history. Learn, again, coding. Again, that's sort of freeing us from some of those anchors that traditional learning has to take place in a classroom. Kaitapu, same thing. These signals in the push of the present. Again, we have new ways of accessing learning, accessing textbooks, but this is actually featured in, this picture's taken from their website. It's featured, obviously they're still in a learning environment, the students are still in their school uniform. So again, it's got a strong pull, but actually it's still rooted in this idea of traditional education structures. And that is no bad thing. These signals, these small innovations, all disrupted. They all worked with the three dimensions of change, but they capitalized on what is the most influential. This idea of how do we have this push in the present, but they don't break the universe. They don't sever all ties with the weight of history. We might have a pull from the future, the goals. You might think that was one of the most influential factors. And yes, you know, we have this very expensive infrastructure in place. Universities might have to think about a future where they still use this infrastructure, but is it used slightly differently? Yeah. The universities, the sustainability goals are interesting as a pull from the future. That might be a strong thing. We know there's growing awareness of these goals. We know they sit out there as a pool of the future that has the vision. And we might start thinking we need to do more to innovate. We need to increase this push of the present and innovate more in the present. Right, very quickly, we're going to put you into your breakout rooms again. We'd like you just to go back to your previous discussions around this, and we'd like you to start thinking about what are the most influential factors in each of those boxes. If you do go with COVID-19, see if you can also highlight another one besides COVID-19, just so we don't get bogged down in COVID-19. I know it's huge, but what I would like you to do is just go into your groups for 5 minutes and discuss which are the most influential factors in each dimension, push, pull, or weight of history, prioritize a couple and think about how they might move that perfect triangle out of shape, and just be on the lookout for any assumptions and biases you might have as you do that. I can be quite biased towards a traditional classroom, yeah? So very quickly, we're going to put you into breakout rooms for 5 minutes, and with the help of your facilitators, we'd like you just to sort of circle those that you think are going to have the most influence, factor in your own examples, and we'd like you to start thinking about how they might pull that perfect triangle out of shape. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Okay, so just to recap, what we were doing there in that particular exercise was we were working to get you to think about which one of the factors on those different dimensions of change, push of the present, pull of the future, weight of history, were you think going to be most influential? Any thoughts, facilitators? Are you happy to feedback on anything that was circulated?
I have to apologise to Kirsty, who was in our group, because she got cut off just as we were talking about it there. But again, the point about the time difference in terms of the weight of history came up, and it was really interesting in that things like business models can obviously change and technology can change and stuff like that. But the reality, as you've said, the reality of time differences are always going to be there. That's always going to be a thing. The world will always rotate. Distance is always there, and that's a constant, I think, and it was just quite interesting to explore that.
It is. It's a huge influential factor around the future of learning. That, you know, if as you say, campuses can be parked, they can be used for different purposes. Business models can change, but time differences can't. Yeah, Fiona, any thoughts?
Yeah, really interesting discussion actually, and probably about the weight of history being one of the most important aspects. Gordon talked about going back to work and actually being a little bit anxious, wanting to feel safe and comfortable. And I think that relates to wanting to go back into your comfort zone. I mean, more than anything with the current COVID situation, people are more anxious. But it's interesting that that's one of the priorities, is actually to feel safe and comfortable, and maybe that's going back to what we know before, and making change can be quite challenging. Ashton made another point as well about the importance of education to everybody, and so again, you know, existing structures being still incredibly important, but actually some of the pull of the future that came out was around the values, and it's about that equity, equality, and the need for education for everyone being even more important now. So some interesting discussion in our group.
I think that's a really interesting point too. I think I would put this ability to feel safe into the push of the present. I would say that's what I call a big social force, that we want to feel safe. We want and we think that we'll find that safety in some of the weight of history. You know, we want to go back to work. We take comfort from existing structures. Jonathan and I, my colleague, we were just discussing that as soon as the academics come back to campus, we're going to meet them. You know, we'll socially distance, but we want that face-to-face contact. We want to feel safe. So all these three elements are really important. And what I would suggest to you is it's worthwhile playing about with them to see what you think are the most important, the ones that have the real tendency to pull that shape out of its perfect triangle. And for those of you who are interested in setting up your own business, it's worth doing this exercise with any topic, you know, just to see what is the most influential factors of the push of the present, pull of the future. But I know I sound like a bit like a broken record, but we so often forget the weight of history. And that's really important. It has a place. And I'll give you an example of why I think that's important. But think of the weight of history. They're not just barriers to the pace and the pace of change and what changes. Think of them, they can be quite positive anchors. So we're imagining the future. If you can relate some of your future to elements of history, that weight of the history, then people are more likely to engage with your vision. They can actually experience it and think, this is relevant to me. So how do we use this? You know, do spend some time. The examples that SI has put into each of these boxes are just that. They're just examples. You'll find a lot more evidence of possible pushes of the present in the resources on the challenge around signals and drivers. So how do we use this tool to spot opportunities to design the future of learning? Or if you're using this tool for a different topic, how do you use it to spot opportunities to design something new, full stop? Okay. So again, these slides are going to be made available to you, so they're done as a handout. But basically, what you can now do is an exercise called world building. You're going to start the process creating a future history of learning that you can inform your video, but it could also be a future of another topic. It's going to be visionary and innovative. If you use this particular tool, what you've done is you have anchored any vision in reality using the weight of history, but you've also explored the push of the present and the pull of the future to start thinking about how that might inform your innovative thinking and the vision you're going to have for the future of learning. And that's just to reiterate, designing futures anchored in aspects of reality allows you to be more imaginative. And that's true, it does. It allows you to not make the mistake of sort of straying into the realms of sort of science fiction. It also allows people to experience your future in a way that you understand. So if you remember right at the start, I said, all teachers are going to be robots. That's not really anchored in the weight of history, and it might get people in education quite twitchy, in which case they wouldn't look at your vision or engage with it. But then look at Marty. Marty was a push of the present. It was an innovation, the push of the present. And if you build a sort of image of the future around things like Marty, that there'll always be robots in classrooms, that's still anchored in reality. We're still talking about traditional classrooms and traditional teaching, but robots are there to help. And I think the next slide, hopefully, will give you an example of how this works. So what to do is use the previous example, the technology, start again, Anne. Use the previous worksheet, how change happens. And you can experience or experiment with all the different influential factors that you circled. Whether you've circled factors in push for the present, whether you've circled influential factors in weight of history. And as Fiona said, some of you were talking about influential factors in the pool of the future. Here's how it works. Take one of your influential factors and develop a bold statement around it. Now, don't shy away from that statement. Can seem quite ridiculous. It's not breaking the weight of history, but it can seem quite ridiculous. So here's me based around Marty. I would have circled Marty and robotical and the use of robots in classrooms as quite an influential factor in the push of the present. So I'm going to build a what-if statement about it. And my what-if statement is all learning environments will feature robots in 5 years' time. And once you've got your bold statement, pull out some consequences from this. Now, this is something you're going to spend some time doing on this, okay? All educators will know how to code. If you're going to have robots in all classrooms, all learning environments, all educators will know how to code, not just the coders. And then I start to get a bit more imaginative. And this is where I can't really give a steer to you on this, except to say, play about with this, give full rein to your imagination. 6 students who are unwell can be represented by their personal robot in the classroom. Students can visit classrooms in other countries represented by their robot. These robots will monitor a student's progress and advise educators on this progress and how to design the next learning level for that student. So what I've done here is I'm pulling out consequences from this bold statement, and I'm being quite imaginative. Well, I think I'm being quite imaginative. This is where you can start to almost build up your own narrative. What if all learning environments feature robots in 5 years' time? What are the consequences for this? What could the classroom look like? What could education look like? Could it be it's not just confined to one space? And this is where, if you've got any ideas of your own, you can add it into this narrative, So I've given some thoughts there. I've represented some very conceptual ideas in that step, but you can add your own ideas into that too. Again, if you're working with another topic, do the same thing. A what-if statement around an influential factor related to your topic. Pull out the consequences. You might get some inspiration for ideas, and you might start to add your own ideas into the mix. But effectively, what I've put in that step 2 is from very conceptual ideas. And also, if you start doing this sort of progress, it also might validate any ideas that you have as well. You can drop your ideas into this narrative and go, hey, that fits. Okay, guys, we're almost there. I'm just going to have a very quick run through some other examples. Selecting another influential push of the present, COVID-19. All regional learning institutions will focus on regional economy, recovery and prosperity. Yeah, I've just been bold. I've just gone, what if? I've made a bold statement. Yeah, we know that we've got to have economic recovery and prosperity, and I would like to think that learning institutions will play a part in that. So again, I've pulled out some consequences from that you can start to look at in your own time. And again, you might start dropping any ideas you have. You'll notice I put down some conceptual ideas there, but you might be able to drop in and validate some ideas that you think, well, actually, do you know what? That fits into those consequences. That fits into that narrative of a possible future world of learning around that particular statement. But here's, if I'd selected the influential pool of the future, the United Nations Sustainability Goal, I've picked 13. And that's what I would suggest to you. If any of you are working with the goals, it's worthwhile taking time to drill down into them, because in Goal 13, it talks about the ability to educate people about the goals. So I've picked Climate 13 and the influential push of the present teach young people about the importance of the goals. Here's my bold statement. All education in 5 years' time will teach climate action as a life skill. Pull out the consequences of that. Yeah, if you're going to teach climate action as a life skill in the classroom, in any education environment, what are the innovations that are going to make that happen? Yeah, and you'll start to build up a narrative around that particular world. Okay, so each of these exercises I'm giving you, showing how you can take an influential factor from each of the dimensions of change, push, pull, weight of history, and start to develop an image of a future world of learning. Right, Jonathan, this is where you groaned. This is where my colleagues thought, guess what? She hasn't mentioned yoga in the hour. And yes, I'm going to mention it. But you can also work with influential weight of the past, existing infrastructure, culture, and values. So I wanted to relate it to something that I know, because as a yoga teacher, I go into a traditional space and I teach. But everything's on Zoom now. And I was quite depressed to have a friend say to me, 2 days ago, oh, I'm never going to do yoga in a traditional class again. I'm thinking, but you've injured yourself twice doing an online class in the last 6 weeks. So sometimes if you don't like that influential, if you don't like what you see in coming from the future, you can present a world that actually, you can influence. So I wanted to use the weight of the past. I think I do have a good attachment to the values and structure and the history of yoga. That's what it's all about. So here's my bold statement. In 5 years' time, yoga will still be taught in traditional classes in physical spaces. And I've pulled out the consequences of that statement. Again, I've got some conceptual ideas here. More people have access to learning yoga in a physical space to improve their health through crowdfunding platforms. Crowdfund somebody who needs access to yoga through crowdfunding, and pay it forward schemes. Doctors will socially prescribe yoga for certain health conditions. Participants can still join online, but there'll be platforms that allow teachers to observe each student and how they are moving, possibly through wearable technology linked to the teacher's platform. Yeah, that's one of the current problems. You can't tell how somebody is moving on Zoom. Are they moving well? Yoga schools will involve as community hubs that promote the health and community spirit of their local community. So again, I just took yoga because it's a learning example, and I selected the influential weight of the past where we have pre-existing infrastructure, culture, and values. And I've made a bold statement that I want to happen, yeah? And I've pulled out an image. So if I present an image of yoga as this, here's my future image of yoga. How can I make that happen in the present to stop everybody just going on to Zoom and there's never any physical teaching of yoga again, because I don't want that to happen, yeah? So I got my yoga example in. I hope that makes sense. Just to wrap up very quickly, love to see you enter the challenge. If you can, feel free to share the challenge with other people. I hope you understand why we set you the importance of imagining the future of learning. We're running a conference towards the end of September, and we hope to showcase students' ideas. So there's your chance to share your vision of learning and engage with different stakeholders. If you are going into our resources, you'll see there's a worksheet in our resources. It's there to help you think about how you might compile your video. You'll see that worksheet divided into 2 parts, research and imagine. You can use the toolkit, How Change Happens, and the drivers and signals to help you complete that part of the worksheet. You'll see part of that worksheet being design and create. This is where the world building exercise comes into this. Okay, so if you are using any of the SI resources and you come across this worksheet and you see the boxes research and imagine, design and create, that's how what we've done today could help you fill out that worksheet that you can then use as another platform to help you build your video. Again, just have a look at that slide in your own time. We'd love to see those of you enter SISA Level 1. I know some of you have joined, already have your SISA Level 3 champion, and SISA Level 1 is a great gateway to the other 2 levels. We're currently working on a very high-touch, online, interactive SISA Level 2 day. So if you get your SISA Level 1, it's a great chance to come and experience some of the new stuff that we're working on. But just to wrap up, what new thing did I learn from, for example, even just doing some of the tools and techniques we did? We learned about how to understand the pace of change. What are the factors that are pulling us towards a certain change? What influences change, the push, pull, weight of history factors? What are the most currently influential change factors? How does this relate to the future? Well, again, it can start getting you to think about imagining futures. And we talked at the start of this workshop about the power of imagining the future, the fact that we can actually bring about what we call preferred futures. And therefore, how does it relate to my future? I think if you're doing this exercise around the future of learning, if you're doing it around any topic, and that topic can relate to your discipline or your study or any areas you're interested in setting up a new venture, understanding the pace of change is really important. You can place your ideas into that, but also it can maybe start getting you to think about what skills do I need? Yeah, if you're imagining the future, place yourself in any narratives that you do around the world building exercise. How does that relate to your future? So that's the SISA Level 1 question. What new thing did I learn? The pace of change, how change happens, how does it relate to the future? It can help you imagine futures, therefore you can take action in the present. And therefore, how does it relate to my future? I would like to think that you can get out there and say to people, I am a future thinker. My ideas are following the direction of travel and the pace of change, whether that's for new venture creation or whether it's able to showcase to an employer that I am somebody who can help them understand how change happens. Okay, I think we've got a couple of minutes for questions. I'm a bit over, sorry about that, guys, but it was the first run through. The next workshop is Bring Your Idea to Life. We're going to talk a little bit more about how you sort of take the worlds that you've built through your narrative by pulling out consequences from your statements to see how can we really turn these into stories about the future. Feel free to sign up at our website to that next workshop. You can join our Facebook group for resources that I mentioned there around some more information on signals and the drivers. Thank you, guys. As I said, this has been done as a handout, so hopefully it's always been designed that this is something you can reflect on and digest in your own time. And again, you're welcome to come back to SIE with any questions after that reflection as well. You use the Facebook group to do that, yeah? Use the Facebook group to do that.